Morning after my mother's funeral, I was still wearing the same black dress I'd cried in the night before. I hadn't slept. I'd just sat at her kitchen table. My kitchen table now, I guess, though it didn't feel that way, with a cold cup of coffee in front of me and her reading glasses still folded next to the sugar bowl like she'd just stepped out for a second. Like she was coming back. She wasn't coming back. My mother died on a Tuesday, 47 years old. An aneurysm, the doctors said. Quick, painless, no warning. One moment she was alive, the next she wasn't. I got the call at work, drove to the hospital, and by the time I got there, she was already gone. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Her name was Ruth. She worked as an office manager at a mid-sized insurance company for over 19 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered every single employee's birthday, kept chocolate in a desk drawer, and stayed late on Fridays just to make sure everything was in order before the weekend. Her co-workers adored her. Her boss, a man named Mr. Harmon, came to the funeral personally and stood in the back with his hat in his hands the entire time. My brother didn't show up. That part still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. My brother, 4 years older than me, the one who always claimed to be the responsible one, the one who had called himself the man of the house since our dad left, didn't come to our mother's funeral. He texted me the night before. Something came up. I'll explain later. I'm sorry. That was it. I didn't respond. What was there to say? So I stood at her graveside with my aunt and two of my mother's friends from church, and we buried her without him. And then I went back to her house and sat at her table and stared at her table and stared at her reading glasses until the sun came up. That's when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up. But something made me answer. Maybe just the need to hear another human voice. Any voice. Is this Mara? It was a man. Calm. Careful. Yes, I said. This is Mr. Harmon, your mother's employer. I'm sorry to call so early. I know the timing is terrible, but I need you to come in today. There's something here you need to see. I thought he meant paperwork, final paycheck maybe, personal items from her desk, that kind of thing. Normal end-of-employment logistics after a death. Of course, I said. When? He paused for just a moment too long. As soon as you can. And Mara, please don't mention this call to your brother. I went still. Why? I asked. I'll explain everything when you get here, he said. Please, come alone. I drove to her office in a daze. The whole ride, I kept telling myself it was nothing. Probably nothing. He was probably just being cautious about something minor. Some HR formality, something that would make sense once I sat down across from him. But the words stayed with me. Don't mention this to your brother. My brother, who hadn't shown up to our mother's funeral. The insurance company was in a low-glass building, about 20 minutes from Mum's house. I'd been there maybe twice in my life. Once for a holiday party years ago, and once when I dropped her lunch off on a day she forgot to eat. The receptionist recognized me immediately and walked me straight back without a word, which felt strange, like she'd been watching for me. Mr. Harmon's office was in the corner. He stood when I came in, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept either. He shook my hand with both of his, held it for a second longer than necessary. Thank you for coming, he said. Please sit down. There was a woman already in the room. She introduced herself as Linda, from the company's internal legal team. That was when my stomach dropped. Mr. Harmon didn't waste time. He set a folder on the desk between us and folded his hands on top of it. Your mother came to me 6 weeks ago, he said. She was frightened. She didn't know who else to go to. He told me that my mother had noticed money disappearing from her personal accounts. Not large amounts at first. $50 here, $100 there. The kind of withdrawals that could easily be written off as forgotten purchases or small subscriptions. But she was careful with money, meticulous. She kept a handwritten ledger at home. Every expense tracked in pencil because she liked to be able to erase and redo if she made a mistake. She knew something was wrong before she could prove it. She started paying closer attention. She checked her accounts daily, and over the course of 3 weeks she watched almost $9,000 disappear from her savings in withdrawals she had never made. She went to the bank. They flagged suspicious activity. The withdrawals had been made using a duplicate debit card, someone had cloned it, and the IP addresses linked to the online activity traced back to a device registered to my brother's home address. I heard that and had to ask Mr. Harmon to repeat it. Your brother, he said quietly. And, we believe, his wife. My mother didn't go to the police. That was the part that broke me most when I heard it. She didn't go to the police because she couldn't bring herself to. He was her son, so instead she went to Mr. Harmon, the man she'd worked for and trusted for nearly 2 decades, and she asked him to help her document everything quietly, just in case. She wanted a record, she said. She wasn't ready to act yet. She just wanted someone else to know. He kept everything. Copies of the bank statements she brought him, emails she'd forwarded, a written account in her own handwriting of everything she'd discovered and when. She'd given him a sealed envelope with my name on it and asked him to give it to me if anything ever happened to her. He slid the envelope across the desk. My hands were shaking when I opened it. It was 2 pages, handwritten, her neat, careful cursive filling both sides. She explained everything, the missing money, what she'd found, what she suspected, and at the end she wrote, Mara, I don't know if I'm overreacting. I hope I am. But if you're reading this, then I wasn't. I love you. Be careful. Don't let them convince you I was confused. I sat in that office and cried until I couldn't breathe. Mr. Harmon gave me water. He gave me time. And then Linda, the attorney, spoke. She said that given the circumstances, the timing of my mother's death, the financial activity, the documentation my mother had left, they had already reached out to a detective at the local police department. Nothing official yet. They'd been waiting for me, but they felt strongly that I needed to know before anything moved forward, and they needed to know if I wanted to move forward. I thought about my brother's text. Something came up. I'll explain later. Yes, I said. I want to move forward. The next few days were the strangest of my life. I was grieving my mother and simultaneously trying to function inside a situation that felt like it belonged in a crime documentary, not in my actual life. The detective's name was something plain and forgettable, which somehow made everything feel more real. Not dramatic, just procedural, just people doing their jobs around a terrible thing that had actually happened. She met with me at Mr. Bowker's. Harmon's office first, and then, later, at a coffee shop closer to my apartment. She walked me through what they had and what they needed. The financial evidence was strong but not complete. My brother and his wife had been careful. Careful enough that proving intent would require more. They needed communication. They needed something that showed this wasn't accidental, wasn't a misunderstanding. She asked if I would be willing to make contact with my brother. She said they could monitor the calls. She said I didn't have to do anything other than talk to him naturally and let him do what guilty people do when they think they've gotten away with something. Explain themselves. I said I would do it. I called him 3 days after that meeting, on a Thursday evening. I sat in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store because I couldn't be inside my apartment for it. I needed to feel like I could drive away if I had to. He answered on the second ring. He sounded, and this is the part that still turns my stomach, relieved. Like he'd been waiting for me to reach out. Like my calling him meant everything was fine. Mara, I'm so glad you called. I've been feeling terrible about the funeral. I want you to know that. Things just... It's okay, I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. I get it. Things happen. He exhaled. I knew you'd understand. You always do. We talked for almost 40 minutes. He talked about Mum, how much she meant to him, how hard it was, how he wished things had been different between them in the last year. He said they'd had some tension. Financial tension, he called it. He said she'd misunderstood some things. I asked him what things. He got quiet. Then he said they'd had an arrangement, that she'd agreed to let him help manage some of her accounts, that it was something she'd wanted. It took pressure off her, he said, and she'd never been great with numbers. My mother, who kept a handwritten ledger of every single expense, who had managed the household finances alone after my father left, who could tell you to the dollar what she'd spent on groceries in any given month for the past 15 years. Not great with numbers. She never mentioned that to me, I said carefully. She probably didn't want to worry you, he said. You know how she was, always protecting you. I kept my voice even. So she gave you access, like officially, with the bank? Another pause. It was more informal than that. It worked for us. I let it sit there for a moment. Then I changed the subject, asked about his kids, let him think the hard part of the conversation was over. After we hung up, I sat in that parking lot for a long time. I thought about my mother sitting alone at her kitchen table, going over her ledger and watching numbers disappear and knowing, somewhere in her chest, exactly where they were going and not being able to do anything about it without blowing up her family. I thought about how scared she must have been and how lonely. I didn't tell him about any of it. I called the detective when I got home and told her what he'd said. She said it was exactly what they'd hoped for. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture filled in. The detective and her team traced the financial activity more completely. My brother and his wife had created what is called an account takeover. They had obtained enough of my mother's personal information to set up online access to her accounts without her knowledge, then used it to siphon money over time. The total, when everything was documented, was just over $22,000. They also found something else. My brother had applied 3 months before my mother died to be named her financial power of attorney. The paperwork was incomplete and had never been filed, but the intent was clear. He had been building towards something larger. The aneurysm had been real. The doctors confirmed it. There was no foul play in her death. But my brother had been preparing to control her finances entirely before she died, and the money he'd already taken was not accidental, was not an informal arrangement she'd agreed to, and was not a misunderstanding. He was arrested on a Friday morning, 6 weeks after my mother's funeral. His wife was arrested the same day. I found out from the detective, who called me before it happened, so I wouldn't be blindsided by anything. I appreciated that. I sat on my couch and I waited, and when she called back to tell me it was done, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired and sad, and like I missed my mother so much I couldn't stand it. My aunt came over that night. She's my mother's older sister, and she'd been the one standing closest to me at the graveside. I told her everything. I'd kept it from her while things were still in process, the way the detective had asked. She sat and listened and didn't say a single word until I was done. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Your mother knew, she said. That's why she wrote that letter. She knew you'd handle it. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse. Probably both. My brother has since hired an attorney. He is contesting the charges, which I expected. His wife posted a version of events on social media that implied my mother had been mentally declining and had confused various financial transactions, which was so precisely what my mother had predicted in her letter. Don't let them convince you I was confused, that I had to put my phone down and go sit outside for a while. My mother's estate went through probate. What remained of her savings, what my brother hadn't taken, came to me. It wasn't a large amount. My mother wasn't wealthy, but she'd had a small life insurance policy through her employer that she'd maintained faithfully for 15 years, and that was enough to let me keep her house for now rather than sell it immediately. I still sit at her kitchen table sometimes. I still haven't moved her reading glasses. I've been asked by people who found out what happened how I feel about my brother now, whether I hate him, whether I could ever forgive him. I don't know how to answer that, honestly. I don't hate him. What I feel is something closer to grief. Not for who he became, but for who I thought he was. For the version of an older brother I spent 30 years believing in, who was never quite real. What I've learned is this. You can love someone your whole life and still not know them. You can share parents, a childhood, a last name, and still be strangers in every way that actually matters. Family isn't just who you grew up with. It's who stays. It's who shows up to the hard moments, not just the easy ones. Mr. Harmon retired a few months after everything happened. He sent me a card. He said my mother was one of the finest people he'd ever worked with, and that honoring her trust was the least he could do. I still have that card in the kitchen, propped against the sugar bowl, right next to her reading glasses. I've thought a lot about what my mother must have felt, sitting alone at that kitchen table, watching numbers disappear from her account, and knowing, the way you just know, exactly where they were going. She didn't go to the police. She didn't call me. She went to Mr. Harmon, a man she'd worked beside for 19 years, because going anywhere else meant making a choice she wasn't ready to make. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. Not the betrayal itself, but her silence around it. How someone can be that afraid of the truth and still be brave enough to document every single piece of it, seal it in an envelope, and hand it to someone she trusted, just in case. That's not weakness. That's a particular kind of quiet courage I don't think I fully appreciated until I was sitting in that office reading her handwriting. Here's what I believe now, having lived through this. People rarely become cruel overnight. My brother didn't wake up one morning and decide to steal from our mother. It happened in increments, small rationalizations, small justifications, one line crossed, and then another. That's how it works. The first withdrawal was probably easy to explain away to himself. By the time he got to $22,000, he'd already built an entire internal story about why he deserved it, why she owed him, why it wasn't really what it looked like. People who do harm almost always have a narrative where they're not the villain. What my mother understood, and wrote down in that letter, is that intelligence without integrity is just a tool for harm. My brother was smart enough to clone a debit card, to build a paper trail that looked like consent, to apply for power of attorney before she died. He used every bit of that intelligence in service of something that hurt the person who raised him, and none of it held up. Not because the world is automatically fair, but because my mother was smarter. She kept her ledger, she noticed, she documented, she planned. She was meticulous her entire life, and that meticulousness, even at the end, was what protected me. I think about that when I feel like being careful and thorough doesn't matter. It always matters. The hardest part of all of this wasn't the legal process, or the grief, or even reading her letter. It was the phone call with my brother, sitting in that parking lot keeping my voice even while he told me my mother wasn't good with numbers. That took something from me that I'm still in the process of getting back. Not because I was performing, but because I had to choose in that moment between falling apart and doing the thing that would actually mean something. I chose to stay steady. I chose to do what she asked me to do in that letter, even though she never said it in those words. She said, "Be careful. Don't let them convince you I was confused." What she meant was, trust yourself. Finish this. I did. That's the only lesson I have. Trust the careful, quiet voice in yourself that says something is wrong even when you can't prove it yet. And when someone hands you the truth, even when it's sealed in an envelope and cost you everything to open it anyway.